That is perhaps unusual given the scope of the station. Meridian Confluence is not a small place. It handles transit for 42 species, processes cargo from 11 star systems, and on any given rotation hosts somewhere in the range of 12,000 souls moving through its corridors, its docking bays, its commercial rings, and its administrative towers. 12,000. And I noticed one. To be fair to myself, I notice most things. That is my function, or was my function, before the position was reclassified, and I was reassigned to what my superior, Dockmaster Vethanel, cheerfully described as a lateral opportunity in interspecies logistics coordination. What this means in practice is that I sit at a monitoring terminal in sublevel 3 and watch cargo manifests roll past on a screen flagging discrepancies, and I do this for 14 hours per rotation. I am Kalen Vor. I am of the Theric people, which means I am tall by most species' reckoning, blue-gray in complexion, with 3 sets of secondary eyes arranged along my temples that do not move but shift focus like independent lenses. My primary eyes, the large amber ones that most species notice first, function more or less as expected. I have 4 arms, 2 of which I typically fold behind my back out of courtesy when speaking with species who find the additional limbs unsettling. My hearing range extends well below what most biologicals can detect, which means I am very often aware of structural sounds in a space. The hum of power conduits, the sub-bass pulse of a docking clamp releasing, that others do not register at all. I am, in short, easy to look at and difficult to fully understand, which I have been told is not the worst position a being can occupy in a universe this complex. But none of that explains why I noticed her. She was sitting in the confluence atrium when I passed through it that first morning, on my way from the transit pod to sublevel 3. The atrium is large, deliberately so, a design philosophy carried over from the station's original Kethian architects, who believed that communal spaces should create the sensation of open sky even when buried in deep space. The ceiling arcs 40 meters overhead, fitted with false light panels calibrated to the average spectral preferences of the station's most common resident species, which means it glows in a gentle amber gold that is neither quite sunrise nor quite afternoon but something in between. There are trees, actual trees, rooted in massive soil containers, Vreth pines from Sector 7, their silver-blue needles filtering the light into soft patterns on the floor. In the center of the atrium, there is a long series of benches, and she was sitting on one of them. She was human. I know this not because I am particularly expert in human biology, but because we have a small and rotating human population on Meridian Confluence. Researchers, trade attachés, occasional tourists who have taken a wrong transit connection and are waiting for a correction route. And I have learned to recognize the species by the usual markers. Bilateral symmetry, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 set of eyes, the particular way their skin catches light differently depending on their individual melanin distribution. She had dark skin, very dark, warm in the atrium's amber glow. Her hair was gathered up in some elaborate architecture at the crown of her head, secured with what appeared to be a pair of writing implements. She wore the gray and blue uniform of a research attaché, with the silver bar at the shoulder that indicated junior grade. She was sitting absolutely alone. And she was eating. From a container on her knee, she was eating something with a small implement quietly, looking at nothing in particular. Her posture was not tense. She was not scanning the atrium for someone. She was simply there, present, eating her meal in complete solitude in the center of one of the busiest transit spaces on the station. I would not have thought twice about it except that I passed through the atrium again 6 hours later on my mid-rotation break and she was there again. Same bench, different container, same posture, same solitude. I filed it somewhere in the back of my awareness and continued to sublevel 3. The second day, she was there in the morning. The third day, same. By the end of the first week, I had established that she arrived in the atrium at what appeared to be consistent intervals, morning, midday, and occasionally in the late rotation hours when the atrium thinned out and the false light shifted toward its evening spectrum, something softer and more violet. She always sat on the same bench. She always ate alone. She always looked comfortable doing it, which was the part that kept drawing my attention, because in my experience, solitude in public spaces is usually either performed confidence or concealed distress, and hers appeared to be neither. She simply seemed to prefer it. Or, and this is the interpretation I gradually moved toward, she had not been given an alternative. I began to pay closer attention. Meridian Confluence has a complex social ecology, as any long-term transit station does. The resident species have established their territories, not aggressively, not explicitly, but in the way that all social organisms arrange themselves in shared spaces over time. The Kethians cluster near the upper observation rings, where the view of the nearby nebula is best and the atmospheric processors run slightly drier. The Grethali prefer sub-level 1's commercial ring, where the lighting is lower and the ambient sound more consistent. The Vornathi, my own people's close kin species, occupy a stretch of the residential tier where they have installed their own food preparation units and a small communal meditation space. The humans on Meridian Confluence did not have a cluster. There were 11 of them, I learned, when I pulled the current resident roster one afternoon between manifests. 11 humans scattered across the station's various departments and residential tiers, each embedded in a different functional unit: research, administration, cargo logistics, medical. They did not share a meal rotation. They did not share a residential block. They had arrived at different times, for different purposes, and they existed on the station in a state of deliberate institutional distribution that someone in the initial placement office had probably believed was integration, and that had in practice amounted to each of them being surrounded entirely by non-humans at all times, with no obvious pathway to one another. The woman in the atrium, her name, I eventually learned from the public staff directory, was Dr. Ayana Osai, research attaché 3rd grade, assigned to the Xenobotanical Survey Office on level 12, had been on the station for 22 days when I looked her up. 22 days, alone in an atrium full of beings who moved around her like water around a stone, not hostile, not unkind, simply not including her. Not because they disliked her, almost certainly because they did not know how to begin, and she had not given them an opening, and the opening had not materialized on its own, and so 3 weeks had passed with her eating lunch on that bench by herself. I want to be precise about what I felt observing this, because I think precision matters here. I did not feel pity. Pity is a strange emotion. It requires you to look down at someone, and I was not looking down at her. She did not appear to need rescue. She was functional. She was doing her work. She was surviving. What I felt was something closer to recognition. I spent 4 years on a research vessel with a crew of Vornathi and 2 Grethali scientists who had not made any particular effort to include me in their social rotation. Not because they disliked me, because I was Theric, and Theric people are quiet, and when you are quiet in a space full of people who are not thinking about you, you become very good at being somewhere without quite being there. I know what it looks like from the outside, that particular quality of aloneness. I know it because I have worn it. And I know what it feels like when someone finally just sits down. On the 23rd day, I brought an extra container. This requires some explanation because I am not by nature an impulsive being. I am methodical. I plan. I review outcomes before committing to actions. The fact that I stood in the sub-level 3 commissary that morning, collected my own meal, and then, after a moment's pause, collected a second container of the same thing, is not behavior that arose without some prior internal deliberation. The deliberation had, in fact, been ongoing for approximately 4 days. The arguments against were clear. I did not know this person. She had not indicated that she wanted company. Approaching a stranger and inserting yourself into their solitude is socially presumptuous, and I have spent enough time as a person who is easy to misread that I am cautious about how my actions are perceived. A large, four-armed etheric male approaching a lone human female to offer food carries a range of possible interpretations, not all of them benign, and I was aware of this. The arguments for were also clear if less tidy. She had been alone for 3 weeks. No one had sat down. I had food. I had the capability of sitting. These things were not complicated. What finally decided me was something I observed on the 22nd day, which I want to describe carefully because it is the kind of small thing that is easy to overlook and important not to. She had been sitting in her usual spot, midday meal, and a group of Gret Holly administrative staff had settled on the bench nearest to hers, 4 of them, shoulder to shoulder, talking in their rapid, overlapping way that sounds like percussion to my ears. They were animated and engaged, and at one point the nearest one had glanced over at Dr. Osai, just a quick glance, the kind you give someone in proximity, and Dr. Osai had looked back. Just for a moment, a second, maybe 2. And she had given this small, careful, almost smile, the kind of expression that means I see you. I am not unfriendly. I would not object to being included. It was not a demanding expression. It was not even quite an invitation. It was just a door left ajar. The Gret Holly staffer had looked away, not unkindly, just not quite catching it. And Dr. Osai had looked back at her container and kept eating, and the door had closed without a sound. I had been watching from across the atrium, and I had seen it, and I had made my decision right there, though it took me another full rotation to act on it. She was on her usual bench when I arrived the next morning. This was her midday break. I had cross-referenced her published schedule, and she was eating something that involved a great deal of layered flatbread and what appeared to be a spiced protein filling, held together with a kind of paper wrapper that she was peeling back in sections as she ate. She was reading something on a small personal device, her head tilted slightly, one foot tucked up under her on the bench, in a way that suggested she had made herself entirely at home in this public space, which I found I respected. I stopped in front of her. She looked up. "Good midday," I said in standard. My standard is good. I spent 7 years in diplomatic facilitation before the lateral opportunity, and language acquisition is a etheric strength. I apologize for the interruption. I am Kalen Vore. I work in logistics coordination on sublevel 3. I pass through this atrium twice per rotation, and I have observed that you eat your midday meal on this bench, and I have also observed that you eat it alone, and I thought, I paused, because I had rehearsed this part less thoroughly than I had imagined I would. I thought I might ask whether you would object to company. I have brought an extra meal. It is grain porridge with a seed paste from the station commissary, which I understand is not particularly exciting, but it is nourishing, and I have more than enough for 2. She looked at me. I am aware that I am a lot to look at, particularly for humans, who have not necessarily spent time around etheric people. I made a deliberate effort to keep all 4 arms visible and relaxed, to keep my secondary eyes unfocused, a etheric signal of ease and non-threat, and to keep my posture at a slight angle rather than square on, which in most bilateral species reads as non-confrontational. She said, "You have 6 eyes." 8 technically, I said. The secondary sets have 2 lenses each, though in low-light conditions the distinction becomes academic. She considered this. Then she moved her personal device to one side, shifted her meal container to her other knee, and patted the bench beside her. "Sit down, Kalen Vore," she said. "I'm Ayana." I sat. The bench was sized for most humanoid species, meaning it was somewhat low for my frame, but I have learned to fold myself into standard-size furniture with reasonable grace, and I managed without incident. I set the extra meal container between us and opened my own. "How long have you been on Meridian Confluence?" she asked. She had resumed eating, which I took as a good sign. It suggested she was comfortable enough to continue a normal activity rather than performing attention for my benefit. 14 months, I said. Before that, I was assigned to the Diplomatic Facilitation Corps for the Kethiantheric Trade Consortium. Before that, a research vessel in Sector 9. I paused. This is a quieter posting. Is that a good thing? I am still determining that, I said honestly. What about you? Your record indicates 23 days. She looked at me sideways. You looked me up. I looked up the human staff roster, I said. I wanted to understand the pattern I was observing. Which pattern? You eating alone, I said. Every rotation, in a space with several thousand inhabitants. She was quiet for a moment. She took a bite of her flatbread wrap, chewed it thoughtfully, and then said, "You noticed that?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since your first day." She laughed, a short sound, surprised, that she covered briefly with the back of her wrist. "And it took you 23 days to sit down." "I was deliberating," I said. "About what?" "Whether you wanted the company," I said. "And then, after I became reasonably certain you did, about whether I was the right person to provide it, and in what manner and with what preamble." She looked at me with an expression I could not fully parse, something between amusement and something softer. "You brought grain porridge," she said. "I did. From the commissary." "It was what I had," I said. "I am not a skilled food preparer." "Neither am I," she said. "I've been eating this flatbread from the level 7 vendor every day because it's the only thing on the station I can identify all the ingredients of and be reasonably confident won't affect me badly." She looked down at it. "It's good, but it's the same, every day." "You could expand," I said. "I don't know what anything is," she said, and there was something in her voice that was very tired, very matter-of-fact, and very different from how she had sounded 30 seconds ago. I came here knowing the research protocol, knowing the botanical survey methodology, knowing my job. I did not come here knowing how to navigate 12,000 beings who are not human, in a space where I don't speak most of the ambient languages, and the food labeling system assumes you know what a Kethian protein is, and I don't." She paused. "I've been doing fine. I want to be clear that I have been doing fine. I just have not been doing anything other than fine, for 23 days, because fine is what you get when you have your work and your bench and your flatbread, and no one sitting next to you explaining anything." I opened the extra meal container and placed it in front of her. "The commissary grain porridge," I said, "is made from a Vornatha cultivar called Sethri. It is a slow-burn carbohydrate. The seed paste is from a plant called Velith, which grows on my homeworld's equatorial belt. It has a slightly smoky flavor profile. It is safe for humans. I confirmed this before purchasing it." She looked at the container, then at me. "You confirmed it before purchasing it," she said. "Of course," I said. "I was bringing it to a human. It would be irresponsible not to check." She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the small implement that came with the container and took a small, cautious bite. I watched. "Oh," she said, that's good. "The commissary is not inventive," I said, "but it is competent." She took another bite, larger. "You said you were in diplomatic facilitation." "For 11 years. "What does that involve exactly?" "Identifying where communication is failing," I said, "and correcting it. Species who believe they are saying one thing and are being heard as saying another. Disputes that look like disagreements about policy but are actually disagreements about what the other party's words mean. I was good at it." I paused. "I am less good at cargo manifests, but the lateral opportunity was non-optional. "Why non-optional?" she said, with the particular directness that I had already begun to associate with her. Not rudeness, just a preference for not wasting time on orbiting a question. I flagged a communication failure in a high-level Kethiantheric trade negotiation, I said. The failure was not mine. The flagging caused a 3-month delay in a contract that several important people had already planned to celebrate. The reassignment was implied. "Politics," she said. "Politics," I agreed. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said. "I have found the cargo manifests peaceful, and the atrium is very pleasant in the morning light." I looked at her. "And now there is this." She looked at me steadily for a moment. Then she smiled, not the careful, hedged almost smile I had seen her give the Gret Holly staffers. This one was fuller. It reached her eyes. "There is this," she agreed. We ate in comfortable silence for a while after that, and I want to say something about that silence because I think it mattered. Silence between strangers is usually uncomfortable. It is a gap that both parties feel obligated to fill, and the filling is often clumsy, the conversational equivalent of two beings trying to fit through a doorway at the same time. But the silence that settled between us after we had established the basic coordinates of each other's existence was not that kind. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people are both at ease with their own thoughts and do not feel the need to perform engagement and are simply present in the same space together. I am Theric. We are a quiet people. Silence is not for us a failure of social connection. It is often its purest form. She seemed to share this instinct, which I found interesting, because humans are generally not described in the xenocultural literature as a particularly silent species. But Dr. Anna Osa ate her grain porridge with the seed paste. She cleaned the container, I noticed, which I took as a compliment, and read intermittently from her personal device. And I ate my own meal and watched the atrium foot traffic and the light through the vrethpine branches, and it was good. Simply and uncomplicated good. "What time do you come through?" she asked eventually. "Morning, I arrive at the atrium at rotation 7.4. Midday, I pass through at 13.1 if nothing is delayed. End of rotation, occasionally, at 19.8 or 20. She nodded. "I'm here at 7.8 most mornings, and at 13 for lunch." She paused. "I don't usually do dinner out. There's a heater in my quarters." "The commissary has a different set of options in the evening rotation," I said. "There is a Theric vendor on level 4 who opens only after 18.5. He makes Sethri differently, with a cured fish paste that I have been told humans generally respond well to, though I cannot personally attest to the flavor reasoning." "You've been told," she said. "By whom?" "I read the xenocultural nutrition literature," I said. "Meridian Confluence's staff onboarding package has a section. It is not very thorough." She set down her implement and looked at me with an expression that was hard to name, something between wonder and something more weighted. "You looked up what humans eat," she said. "I was going to bring you a meal," I said. "I wanted to do it correctly." "Most people," she said carefully, "don't do that." "I am aware." "Most people," she continued, "either don't think about it, or they think about it and it seems like too much work, or they assume I'll figure it out on my own." "You would have," I said. "Eventually. You are clearly competent, but eventually is not now, and now was when I had the grain porridge." She looked at me for a long moment. "Kalen Vor," she said. "Yes." "I'm glad you sat down." "So am I said. And I meant it in a way that surprised me a little, not just as social courtesy, not just as the satisfaction of having completed a planned action. I meant it in the deeper register, the one where you realize that a thing you have been missing has just quietly walked back into your life without announcement, wearing the form of a stranger eating lunch on a bench. The next morning, I stopped at the atrium on my way in. She was already there. She had 2 containers this time, her flatbread wrap in something new, a dark-colored broth in a sealed cup from a vendor I recognized on level 2, run by a Vornathe family who had been on the station longer than I had. She held up the cup when she saw me. I tried something new. How is it? Strange, she said, considering. But good strange. She tilted her head. What's in it? It tastes like, I don't know, something smoky and dark with an edge of something almost sweet. Veth broth, I said, sitting down. It is made from a dried root that the Vornathe use medicinally as well as culinarily. The smoke comes from the drying process. The sweetness is a natural compound in the root that caramelizes slightly when steeped in hot water. She looked at the cup with renewed interest. Medicinal how? Broadly anti-inflammatory, I said, though the research on cross-species applications is incomplete. For humans, the general guidance is that it is safe in moderate quantities and may have mild calming properties. Or it may simply taste pleasant and make you feel calmer because it tastes pleasant. The literature is not entirely sure. I'll take it either way, she said. We sat. The atrium filled around us in its morning pattern, the early shift Kethian cargo workers moving through in their characteristic clusters, the Vornath administrative staff who always seemed to arrive in pairs, the occasional solo Grethali technician who moved with the fast, bouncing gait of their species and always seemed faintly startled to find themselves anywhere, as if transit were a condition they had never quite adjusted to. Can I ask you something? Lana said. Yes. Why were you watching? For 23 days, I mean. You noticed me on the first day, you said. She was not accusatory. She was genuinely curious, with that directness I had already come to think of as essentially her. Why did you keep watching instead of just sitting down earlier? I thought about how to answer this honestly. I was trying to understand what you wanted, I said finally. I was in diplomatic facilitation for 11 years. The first thing you learn in that work is that intervention without comprehension is not help, it is imposition. If you had wanted to be left alone and I had sat down, I would have been making your problem worse, not better. I needed to watch long enough to be reasonably confident that I understood your situation correctly before I acted on it. She was quiet for a moment. And what did you conclude? That you were alone because the structures around you had not created an entry point for connection, not because you preferred it. That you were competent enough to manage without connection indefinitely, but that you were not thriving. That you had offered openings that had not been received. I paused. The expression you gave the Grethali staffers 3 days ago. She went very still. You saw that? Yes. That was, she stopped. I didn't realize anyone was watching. I was watching, I said, and I understood it. And I thought someone should answer it. She looked away from me, toward the Vreth pines, and I gave her a moment because I could see that she was managing something, processing something, and I did not think she needed me to fill the space. 3 weeks, she said quietly. It's not that long, objectively. People go months without real connection in places like this. They do, I agreed. And I knew what I was coming into. The briefing document said the station had a small human presence. I knew it would be different. I chose this posting. Yes. So I don't want to seem like I'm complaining. You are not complaining, I said. You are describing. Those are different things. She turned back to me then, and something in her face had shifted, not broken open exactly, but unlocked. It's very different, she said, than I expected, not in a bad way, in a very large way, like the difference between understanding intellectually that space is big and actually standing somewhere in it. She looked at the atrium ceiling. Everything here is built by and for beings who are not me. The proportions are different. The light is different. The sounds are different. Even the silence is different. It has different frequencies in it. I notice it all, constantly, every moment of every rotation, and I can't turn it off. You adapt, I said. Gradually. The noticing does not stop, but it becomes integrated. textured rather than disorienting. You sound like you know. I spent 4 years on a research vessel where I was the only Theric, I said. The crew were not unkind. They simply did not think about me much because they were thinking about their work and each other, and I was present but not included. I learned the shape of that experience quite well. She was looking at me with something careful and intent in her expression. What changed? One of the Vornothi scientists, I said. Her name was Ethavo. She brought me a food item one day from her personal supply, a seed cake from her homeworld. She said she had noticed I never ate with the crew. She asked if I would like to eat with her instead. Yana was quiet. I sat with her for the remaining 2 years of that posting, I said. We are still in correspondence. She just brought you a seed cake, Anna said. That is all it took, I said. Someone deciding that the gap was worth the step. She looked down at the Veth broth in her hands. Then she looked up at me. Thank you for the grain porridge, she said. Yesterday. It was commissary grain porridge, I said. The gratitude seems excessive. No, she said quietly and firmly. It doesn't. Weeks passed. I want to be precise about what changed and what did not, because I think honesty requires me to be precise. The station did not change. The cargo manifests continued to roll. Dockmaster Vethanul continued to be cheerful in a way that I had learned to interpret as her natural resting state, rather than a comment on my performance. Sublevel 3 was still Sublevel 3. The hum of the power conduits, the particular quality of recycled air, the fluorescent panels that flickered slightly in the northeast corner, and had been on the maintenance report for 6 months. None of that changed. But the atrium changed, or rather, what I found when I arrived there changed. We settled into a rhythm, Ayana and I morning. I would find her at the bench, sometimes already eating, sometimes waiting, sometimes reading, and I would sit, and we would eat together, and we would talk or not talk in roughly equal measure, and both were good. Midday, I would come through if my manifest load allowed it, which was most days, and she would be there, and we would eat together again. Evenings were rarer, her work often ran late, and mine ended later than hers. But occasionally we would find ourselves in the atrium in the evening light. The false panels shifted to their violet spectrum, and we would eat something from the level 4 Theric vendor, and talk until the atrium had nearly emptied around us. I learned things about her. She was 31 years old, in the Gregorian human calendar system. She had grown up in what humans called a coastal city, in the southwestern region of a continent called Africa, and she described her childhood in terms that made me understand, gradually, that she had spent it surrounded by family. A very large, very loud family who ate together constantly, who expressed care through food and through presence, and through the specific language of someone always being nearby when you needed them. She had been apart from them for 3 years, since her first posting off-world. She did not describe this as loss, but I heard it in the way she described the coastal city, with a particularity of detail, a precision of memory that you only have for things you hold carefully. She was a xenobotanist by training and by genuine vocation, which meant she was interested in the ways that plants evolved different solutions to the same problems across different planetary conditions, and she could speak about this at considerable length, which I encouraged because she was more animated when she talked about her work than at almost any other time. She had a theory about convergent evolution in low-moisture environments that she was developing for her survey report, and when she explained it to me, gesturing with her flatbread wrap as if it were a pointer, I understood perhaps 60% of the underlying science and found that 60% completely absorbing. She laughed easily once she was comfortable. It was a specific laugh. It arrived in stages, first a short exhale, then a broader sound, then, at the extremes of amusement, a full physical involvement that included her leaning forward and covering her face briefly with both hands. I learned which of my observations produced each stage, and I will not pretend I did not sometimes calculate this. She was direct. She did not perform social niceties she did not feel, which meant that when she expressed interest in something I said, I could trust that she meant it. She asked questions the way a scientist asks questions, not to fill silence, but because she wanted to know the answer. And she was kind in a way that I had not expected, though I should perhaps have. She noticed things. Not just the large things, the way I noticed her missing a connection in the social fabric of the station, but small things. She noticed when my secondary eyes were particularly active, a sign, in etheric people, of either heightened alertness or agitation, and she would ask carefully whether I was all right. She noticed when I folded all four arms, which I only do when I am tired, and once she said very simply, "Go sleep, Kalen Vor. The manifests will wait," and she was right, and I did, and they did. I learned other things too, about humans, about this one specifically, but about the species as a whole. In the particular way you come to understand a species not from the xenocultural literature, but from sustained proximity to one of them. Humans are, on average, much warmer than most species I have spent time with. Not in temperature, etheric people actually run warmer by most measurements, but in the social and emotional register. They communicate a great deal through physical proximity and through a kind of ambient attentiveness to each other that most other species do not maintain so constantly. When Ayana was listening to me, she was really listening, not processing my words while formulating her response, but receiving them, sitting with them, sometimes taking several seconds before she spoke, not because she was slow but because she was thinking. She was lonely. I think she had been lonely since her first posting off-world, not acutely, not desperately, but in the low-grade, persistent way of a person who is constitutionally built for connection and has not yet found their people in the place where they happen to be standing. I understood this, intimately, in the deep register. It was about 6 weeks after I sat down that she said something I want to record carefully. We were in the atrium in the evening. The light was violet gold. Most of the foot traffic had thinned. We had been eating something from the level 4 vendor, Sethri prepared with the cured paste, which she had come around to completely and ate now with evident pleasure. And we had been talking about her survey project, and then we had been quiet for a while, and the quiet had been the good kind. She said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Yes," I said. "Why did you do it? The first day, not the deliberating, I understand the deliberating, but after the deliberating, why did you decide the gap was worth the step?" I considered this. "Because I have been the person on the bench," I said, "and no one sat down, and I know what it felt like, and I know what it would have felt like if someone had, and I thought, I stopped, organized myself. There is a particular quality to being seen in the moment when you are trying not to need to be seen, when you have managed to make yourself functional and sufficient, and you have stopped expecting that anything will change, and then something changes anyway." I paused. "I wanted you to have that, because I did not have it, and I think it would have mattered." She was looking at me with an expression I still could not entirely parse, even after 6 weeks of learning her face. "You did it for past you," she said softly. "Partially," I said, "but also for present you. The two motivations are not in conflict." She was quiet for a moment. The light shifted slightly overhead as the atrium's day cycle completed another increment. "When I applied for this posting," she said, "my department head told me it would be challenging. Not the science," she said. "The science was exactly my area and I would do well. She said the challenge would be the people, that I would be far from my community and that building new community in an environment like this takes time." She looked at her hands. She was right. It does take time, but she didn't say no one said that someone might just show up and decide to sit down. "No one said it to me either," I said. "When it happened to me, it was entirely unexpected." "And yet you remembered it well enough to replicate it, 11 years later." 14 years later, I said. "On a research vessel, I was 23, I am 37 now." She smiled at this. You have a very good memory. Theric people do, I said. But I do not think you need to be Theric to remember the first time someone handed you a seed cake and sat down. She was quiet. The Vrethpine branches moved slightly in the processed airflow. I've been sending more messages home, she said. Since you sat down, is that strange to tell you? No, I said. Why more? Because things are happening here that I want to tell people about, she said. When things were just fine, there wasn't much to say, but now I have things to say. I did not speak for a moment, because something in that sentence required a moment. I am glad, I said finally. And then, because I am Theric, and we are not given to elaborate emotional displays, but I believe in precision, and precision here required more. I am glad that things are happening that you want to tell people about. I am glad I sat down. She looked at me for a long moment. Me too, she said. There are things I could tell you about what happened after that. More weeks. A shift in my work assignment, Dockmaster Vethanul, moved me to a coordination role that involved actual species interface work, less cargo manifest and more facilitation, because the Kethian-Gret-Holly transit dispute needed a mediator and I was, apparently, available. A small irony, applied correctly. I solved it in 3 weeks by identifying the communication failure, which turned out to be a word in the Gret-Holly administrative dialect that had 2 entirely different meanings depending on tonal inflection, one of which was contractually binding, and one of which was merely aspirational, and no one had noticed for 4 years. Vethanul laughed when I presented the finding. Then she looked at me with something I recognized as reassessment. You're good at this, she said. I have been trying to tell you that for 14 months, I said, which perhaps wasn't diplomatic, but she laughed again, which I took as a good sign. I told Ayana about it over morning Sethri porridge the next day. She put down her implement and looked at me with the full attending expression. 4 years, she said. 1 word, 2 meanings. No one thought to check, I said. And you checked. I always check. She shook her head slowly, but she was smiling. 14 months of cargo manifests. They were peaceful, I said, and the atrium is very pleasant. She gave me the full laugh, the one that involves both hands and leaning forward, and I let myself feel the satisfaction of that, which is not a complicated feeling, but is one of the better ones I know. Here is what I know about sitting down. It costs almost nothing. A second container of grain porridge from the station commissary, the confirmation check to make sure it is safe for the species in question, the walk across an atrium you were already crossing, the decision to stop and not continue to the other side. It costs almost nothing, and the cost of not doing it, the cost of walking past, of deliberating too long, of deciding that the gap is not your responsibility to cross, is paid by someone else in the currency of weeks. I do not think I am special for having sat down. I think I was shaped by experience to recognize what I was seeing, and I acted on that recognition, and I was not, in the end, wrong about what I found. What I found was a person, a scientist, a woman who had come a very long way from a coastal city to sit alone in an atrium and eat flatbread wraps and offer small, careful almost smiles to people who did not quite catch them. She was, as I had assessed, entirely competent. She did not need me. She would have been fine. Fine is not what I wanted for her. What I wanted, what I have now in the form of a morning bench, and a midday meal and conversations about convergent evolution, and the specific laugh that arrives in stages, is better than fine by a considerable margin. And she knows this. I have said it to her, imprecisely, in pieces, because Theric people say important things imprecisely and in pieces, which is a cultural failure I am aware of but cannot entirely correct for. But she understands me. She is a scientist. She is very good at reconstructing the full picture from partial data. Last week she brought me something from a new vendor, A level 9 Theric trader who had arrived with a supply of Velith seed confections from our homeworld's northern province, sweetened and pressed into flat rounds, wrapped in leaf paper. She had gone to the vendor alone, asked about them, confirmed they were traditional rather than modified, and brought me 3 of them. She set them in front of me without explanation. I looked at them, then I looked at her. "I saw them and I thought of you," she said simply, in the way she says things she means. I ate one. It tasted like my homeworld, like the equatorial belt in late season, like something I had been far from for a long time. "They are very good," I said. "Good," she said, and went back to her survey notes. And that is what I want to tell you about sitting down. It is not a grand act. It is not heroic. It does not require special equipment or special permission or a particular category of bravery. It requires only that you look at the gap, understand what it costs, and decide that the step is worth taking. Sometimes the person on the other side of the gap is waiting for exactly that. Not rescue, not drama, just someone who looked and understood and sat down anyway. And if you are lucky, if you are as lucky as I have been, they will bring you Velith seed confections 3 weeks later and set them in front of you without explanation, and you will taste your homeworld, and you will understand that the gap in both directions has been crossed. That is all. That is enough. That is, in fact, more than enough. Recorded by Kalen Vore, Logistics Coordination Division, Meridian Confluence Station, in the 14th month of his assignment, and the 9th week of his acquaintance with Dr. Ayana Osai, Xenobotanical Survey Office, who he would like the record to note, has expanded her lunch repertoire to 14 different station vendors and shows no sign of stopping. End of story.